So what's up, everybody? We're back with another episode of the Space Time Podcast. We'll be highlighting design thinking, entrepreneurship, technology, and leadership as a whole, right, on our podcast. And today we have a special guest, Janeya Griffin. Thank you for being with us today. Can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name's Janeya Griffin. I go by the Commercializer. I'm a serial entrepreneur that has spent most of my career working at NASA doing technology transfer and commercialization, and then starting companies to really help with social entrepreneurship, generational wealth building, and intellectual property in a sense.
Absolutely. Thank you. So you have a very interesting story, right? So I looked at your Instagram, LinkedIn. I checked out all your clips from being, interviewed by the local news in San Diego. And I really wanted to kind of go back to the beginning, right? So your major. So when you were an undergrad, right, you were in chemistry and forensic engineering. I think that's what it was, or forensic sciences.
Yeah. So I double majored. So I did criminal justice and
Mm-hmm.
chemistry with a concentration in forensic science.
Got it. Okay, great. And then you obviously, so being in technology commercializer and then even like within engineering and NASA, that's a little bit of a different type of, kind of like a career
It,
switch in a lot of ways.
it's completely different.
Absolutely. So
Uh,
yeah, I wanted to talk about that. Let's dive into that. So talk to me about your journey and how you went from there to where you are now.
so I originally wanted to, I'll start here. So I originally wanted to be a computer tech.
Okay.
Um, and my high school at the time had the school district had an opportunity where you could like apprentice essentially at one of the NASA centers. So I lived next to a NASA center, NASA Armstrong Flight, well, it used to be called Dryden Flight Research Center. And now they've recently changed it to Armstrong Flight Research Center. But back then it was Dryden. And they had what were called NASA Sharp students, which were
Mm-hmm.
basically apprentice students, but they were from high school. And so I was one of the ones that was selected within our district. And they essentially told you, like, hey, pick a career or, basically like a job that you would be interested in. And I knew that I wanted to be a computer tech because I just like to like solve problems and stuff like that. But because I was not as knowledgeable about like the roles and responsibilities that went along with the title, the job title,
Right.
I saw computer engineer and I was like, well, computer engineers make more money. So like, I'm essentially thinking they're the same thing. Why not
Yeah.
engineer, computer? And so I selected that thinking that I was going to essentially be an IT. And
Right.
like I was not.
Yeah,
They
absolutely.
put me in the simulations in the Sims department,
Got
and
it.
I was doing graphical user interfaces, and doing the table of contents and testing and different things like that. And so I was just like, this is for computer engineers, programming. Like, and
Right.
I didn't want to do, I was like, this is not what I want to do. You guys just sit in your office all day
All
at your
day.
desk. You don't talk to anybody. Like,
Right.
I'm a social butterfly. Like, this is not for me. So,
Right.
um, I always say that is what led me into where I am today because it helped me to know who I was not. And I had to learn who I was not in order to know who I
Who
was,
you
right?
are.
Or to learn who I
Absolutely.
was. Yeah. And so I was like, nope, I don't want to do that. And so I had this after school program where we would do like crime scene investigation. They teach you like CSI. So they would like set up the room and like you would have to go in and try to like solve the crime. And so I was like, oh, I really, really like that. So like that's what I want to
Mm-hmm.
do.
Right.
And so my college at the time, Grambling State University, um, I decided that I want to go there. So I was like, okay, well, because I got two scholarships. So I got an academic scholarship and an athletic scholarship. And so they told me I had to choose. So I said, well, I'll just go with the academic scholarship and then I'll walk on for the track
Got
team.
it. Nice.
Um, and so I ended up getting there and I was like, hey, criminal justice, right?
Right.
That's all I know about what crime crime scene investigation. I know that they're the police, right? And
Right.
so like criminal
The
justice, like
feds.
that's what I'm doing, right? That's
Yeah.
that's my major. And so when I got there, I learned that they actually had a forensics program in their chemistry department, but this was after the first semester. So I
Got it.
said, oh, well, let me look into this because this is exactly what I want to do.
Hmm.
And when I looked at it, since I had already done taking the classes for criminal justice for my first semester, they kind of were still in line with the chemistry program. And so I was
Right.
like, well, I don't want to just throw those away. So I'll just double major. I just have to stay an
Might
extra
as well.
semester.
Why
Yeah,
not?
like, okay, cool. Great.
Got it.
So then I double majored and I got
Right.
I got two bachelor's degrees, one in criminal justice and the other in chemistry with a concentration in forensic science. Um,
Exciting.
and that led me to get into a program at Cal State University San Bernardino
Okay.
called the Integrated Technology Transfer Network. And so it was a fellowship, a $50,000 fellowship, but they took STEM students from HBCUs, brought us to California, and then taught us the business side of things. So we could already speak like the technical details, the scientist language, but we were able to then be able to translate that into a value proposition that business people would be able to understand. And that's where I learned about tech transfer, commercialization, VCs, venture capital. I learned about investing. I learned about angel investors. Like before this whole, like, there's not enough money being given to Black people. And like, oh, this industry actually exists and there's this huge disparity. Like I was already in it. And learning very a lot about it actually. And so that's kind of what led me there initially
Right.
on my majors.
Program that you talked about, was that
Oh,
like
right.
was that like NASA, or was that like a little early on before that?
Um, no, so the Integrated Technology Transfer Network was not a NASA program. The NASA SHARP program
Got
was
it.
the NASA program when I was in high school. And then when I graduated college, then I went to Cal State University San Bernardino in their
Got it.
Integrated Technology Transfer Network program. So essentially, it was like I was getting an MBA, but it was a certificate program around technology, entrepreneurial technology commercialization.
Got
So
it. And
they're the
then okay.
ones that introduced me to federal labs and all of these different things, which is where I kind of learned about tech transfer being a thing and
Got
NASA
it.
having a tech transfer office. And so then I just started applying to all of these different positions because I said, this is what I want to do. Um, but I didn't know at first. I was just like, I want to be able to utilize both of my degrees, but I
Right.
didn't know how I was going to be able to utilize them. And then the dean of my college at the time was the one who actually introduced me to the fellowship program.
Hmm.
And the first, I remember this because he called me in the office and he was like, Janeya, you can't have a boss. And I was like, Dr. Hubbard, I don't know if I should take that as a compliment or not. And so what he was trying to tell me was that like you're an entrepreneur, and that
Yeah.
was before I knew what an entrepreneur was, or
Right.
like that there was this whole like industry around helping them and all of this stuff. And so
Right.
he was like, you should apply for this. And so I was like, all right, sure. I don't.
Yeah.
Cool. Sounds interesting. It's $50,000 and it takes me home, right?
Right.
Because I'll be in California, close to my family, like all this. So I was like, yeah. So I got in, and apparently it was a really like, um, uh, not a strenuous process, but there was a lot of people that
Hmm.
had applied, and so they picked uh 12 of us or 11. There was 11 of us in the program.
Hmm.
And flew us out from all parts of the country. So it was
They flew you
cool.
out. They flew you.
Yeah.
They flew y'all out.
Oh,
You got
I
flown
got
out.
flued out. Yeah.
No, no, okay,
Um,
that's what's up. So then, just for the people who don't know, because I think that our audience is kind of like on a spectrum of like people who are like very technical and people who are, trying to figure out where they, align within this tech space. So can you please explain what tech commercialization is, right? Can you please explain that in like really simple
right.
terms? Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the example that I like to use. When you think about Christmas, right?
Mm-hmm.
People always say like, "Oh, this is the commercialization of Christmas." But what does that even mean? It just essentially means that you're making a profit off of something. So when we think about technology commercialization, it is now you taking a technology that was essentially created for something else and you are making a profit off of it. So you're selling it in a way. When we get to technology transfer,
Mm-hmm.
that's typically when you will have like a university that is doing tech transfer or a federal laboratory where basically they have done research and development within their labs and now they're trying to take that technology that they've developed and they're trying to sell it essentially or get somebody else to sell it in the commercial space. So for the federal labs, they have over 350 federal labs that all do technology and technology transfer. And they spend $150 billion every year. And so that was back in
Yeah.
2021. So I don't
Right.
know
What
the
is like
specs
now?
now in terms of like how much they spent, especially like with COVID coming and us having the pandemic. There was so much R&D that actually went in, so many dollars because of the CARES Act and all this stuff that actually went towards coming up with a cure, a vaccine, right, for us
Mm-hmm.
to be able to use. And so um, a lot of that R&D was at the federal labs, and a lot of the technologies that were developed within those labs were commercialized by private companies, and they license the rights, which basically come from having a patent. They license the rights to be able to turn those into commercial products. So things that we use every single day, like our
Like
phones, like the
microwaves. Yep.
cameras in the phones, baby formula, GPS navigation, like all of these different things have stemmed from federal laboratory uh, and then the research and development that's gone on in it.
Yeah, and I think that's great. And it's actually funny because so when I was a part of the NASA program last year, it was a tech transfer program, and that was actually the first
Mm-hmm.
time that I learned about, commercializing technology, right? And I think it's important because I think so after doing research, I realized that the term that you can like call somebody is like you would call them like an associative thinker. And associative
Mm-hmm.
thinkers are people that can take something that may have a very unintended use case and apply it to something else. So people who often use metaphors. So when it seems like as I'm speaking to you, I'm like you have associative thinking, which is kind of a skill set actually, because
Mm-hmm.
what I realize is that if somebody walks into a federal lab and they see a technology and they may, read the spec or they may even, get a brief description of it, they may not have the skill set to really see how that can apply to a certain use case in life, right? And that's actually, a skill set. So, so then that obviously led you to having the term the commercializer, right? So, can you please talk about like what you've been doing with that brand? Tell me about the brand, just some of the use cases that you kind of seen, developing, that.
Yeah. So, yes, that did lead me to, you know, coming up with a moniker, and that's how it initially started was,
Yeah.
I was on the executive board of the Federal Laboratory Consortium, which I said is over 350 labs that all do tech transfer. And they they were able to help me position myself
Yeah.
essentially to go out and talk to the community around, hey, there are all these resources and capabilities and things that exist, opportunities for you to be able to not only just get into the tech industry, but also, to flourish in it, right? To be successful. Even if you didn't have any technology incorporated into your company. And so I made it a part of my mission to advocate for that and really take that and introduce that to our communities so that we could increase more minority owned business engagement with the federal labs. And so they allowed me to kind of like fly around the country and go to these different conferences and talk to people. And whenever we needed to talk about like diversity, equity, inclusion,
Hmm.
or why we needed to get more people involved into, working with the federal labs, they would send me out. And so I did that for a number of years. But
Right.
while I was doing that, I was like, hey, I need to create this professional image, this professional moniker that I can go by because like I don't want people going to my personal Instagram page, right?
Yeah,
Not to
no, for
say it was
sure.
bad, but it's just like
Yeah, you want to
I
separate the
want,
two. Yeah,
yeah, correct. And so I was like, well, what do I do? Like, I don't like what should I call myself? And I'm like, well, I commercialize things, so I'm the commercializer. And
right.
it kind of just stuck.
Just
And
stuck.
so now, like, I always, like, even in the beginning of this, like, my name is Janeya Griffin and I'm the commercializer. Like, I
Right.
introduce myself as that because that's what I do. And so, um, once I started doing consulting for folks, um, I was just like, oh, okay, well, somebody would ask me like, hey, could you come and speak? Could you do you consult? And I'm like, sure, and I
Right.
needed to have a vehicle in order to receive that money. As the road started, getting more, more lengthy. And so
Yeah.
I decided to turn it into an LLC, um, and incorporated, and then, well, not incorporated, but
Yeah, I
yeah,
got you. Yeah.
uh, and then um, uh, and then I registered the Commercializer as a trademark. So it is a registered trademark because I cannot be out here talking about the value of intellectual property and why we should own it and not
Exactly.
have any IP myself.
100%.
That makes no sense.
No, for sure.
So definitely practice when I preach.
Yep.
Um, and then after I left NASA, really started getting into more consulting, taking on more clients, and have essentially decided to create a product. So it's now went from it's a moniker to it's just a vehicle to do consulting to now we're offering software as a service,
Yeah.
alongside that consulting. So it's definitely been a journey, um, but it's definitely something that like it. As I was building the brand, people now know me as the commercializer, and if they see it anywhere else, they're like,
Yeah.
"Janeya,
Like that's
you're
yeah.
not the commercializer." And so, funny story, really quick. Um, I ended up hiring independent contractor to do some
Hmm.
work with me. And because I couldn't make it to one of the speaking engagements, I sent her on my behalf. And so when she introduced herself, she's like, "Yeah, I'm with the commercializer." And so because it was only known as a moniker and not an
Hmm.
actual business or company, I literally was getting text messages like, "Janeya, somebody else is
It's trying to
using
be
your
you.
name." Yeah. And these
That's
are like
funny.
people I didn't even know. And I was like,
Yeah.
what? Like, what are you talking about? So it's really great. And that your brand has really made an impact, or at least people, you can say you have a brand when that is what people know you as. So, like, now, if anybody thinks anything intellectual property, patents,
Hmm.
trademarks, it doesn't matter. They're like, you need to talk to Janeya, the commercializer. You need to do
Yeah.
this. And so, like, I have people that will come to me all the time, like just random people, like, hey, I heard I need to talk to you about, intellectual property. I got a patent. I don't know what to do with it. So, like, that's when
Yeah.
you doing a good job with your branding.
No, no, and it's funny story though because so I was pitching my business Space Time, right, which is the next generation research and development marketplace of talent sourcing. So that can include federal labs, researchers, engineers, the whole nine, right? So then when somebody told me about you, they actually referred you to me as a commercializer. They said, "Oh, you need to connect with the commercializer." And this was a time where like I relatively am just now getting into the San Diego community. So then I'm just like, the who? The what? So then she said, "Oh, Janeya Griffin, this is the commercializer." So then I think that ends up bringing me to this next topic, which I think is really important. I really want to hear some of your thoughts on this. So I'm going to read this to you, right? So you said, so first off, you testified in Congress in 2020,
Mm-hmm.
and the quote that you have is Black inventors receive 6 patents per million people compared to
Mm-hmm.
235 of their white counterparts. So if you combine 13 of the nation's NFL stadiums and only 6 of those seats were for Black people, and it's clear
Mm-hmm.
that even with the invention of the internet, right? So I want to talk about this, right? So can you talk to me about their time testifying, in Congress, and then this quote that you just explained, and then you also said something at the end where you said, Black people were considered intellectual property at one point, while they were also developing intellectual property at one point, and those same engineering products were essentially used as a bargain for their slavery, for freedom during slavery. So it's a
Mhm.
lot to unpack, but I think our viewers will
A
really,
lot.
find a lot of interest here. So can you just explain that how'd you actually first, how'd you even get the opportunity to testify in Congress? Let's talk there first. Let's talk about that first.
Uh, so I'm gonna shout out my chief of staff at the time,
Okay.
Julius Valentine, Mina. I literally just said his little government. It's just me. That's just normal for me. He's gonna kill me.
I think you may be
Um,
the feds.
he's
The
gonna,
feds.
but yeah. So he actually knew someone who was looking for somebody to talk more about
Hmm.
it, and so again, it's really all about who you know.
Yeah.
Um, and because I had such this, this brand, and it was easy. Oh, instantly. Okay, yes, you need to talk to Janeya. And so he kind of put that play together for us. And I was able
Nice.
to go down. Now, the crazy thing about it was this was obviously my first time on the Hill. And I did not know what to expect, but I was taking it very lightly, like because I just thought it was is is a convening, like everybody's coming
Right.
together. We're gonna like talk about this, like you'll testify, in terms of like in a group, right?
Right.
And it's not gonna be like this huge, humongous thing. And then I had like my mentors calling me once I told them, and they were like, Janeya, this is big. And I'm like,
Big.
what do you mean? So
Right.
and that was when COVID had like first hit, but nobody knew it was there.
It was there, yeah. No, no, for
It
sure.
was
Yeah, I
not
remember
it was
that.
not COVID then. It was
Yeah.
not a pandemic then.
Right.
Um, because I had literally and then I was sick. I got sick. So like I
Oh,
got sick before I went, and it was like one of those. I feel like honestly I had COVID before COVID was a thing.
right.
Um, because I was sick for like 2-3 weeks. It was bad.
Mm.
Um, and then after I came out of that, then I was like, okay, I have to do this. And so I'm thinking I just show up. And they're like, no, like
Yeah.
you have to have a written statement. You need to have an oral statement. And then it was just like, wait, but what do written statements look like? Literally, I
Yeah.
did like this 12-page research paper with references and cited, like all of this stuff. And I'm like, I had to do it over a weekend. And
Yeah.
so, like, I got one of my contractors to actually help me. And so, like, we did that. And then I wrote my oral testimony like literally the day before
Right, right,
the
right.
day before I was supposed to go on. So yeah, that's how I got there. And then it was a really great experience. It was nerve-wracking. I literally had 2 hours of sleep before I walked into it was bad because like I told you,
Yeah.
like I was not fully prepared for I didn't
Right.
really understand like that this is what I was doing
Absolutely. Yep.
until like I understood, and then I was like, oh crap. Like
Right.
so yeah. So I did that, and then to go back to the quote, um so it when with commercialization it's very important that you always start obviously like with a problem first, right?
Hmm.
And in order to have people understand and like feel the problem, they have to be able to visualize what that looks like. So
Yep. That's football
what I
stadiums.
always teach is that like you need to be able to relate it to something that they can understand, and then put it into a perspective to where they're like it hits them like wow, and so you have to be able to quantify that problem. And so that was essentially me quantifying the problem by
Right.
saying, hey, there's six patents owned by Black people per million people. Um, and like, if I say that, you're
It's
like,
like nothing.
okay,
Yeah.
like six
Yeah.
out of a million, like, okay, yeah, but
Right.
that that's not a lot, right? But you don't get to see how
Right.
massive it is. You don't get to visualize that in your mind. And so I said, okay, so how can I actually visualize this to where people will be like no,
Whoa.
this is like we need
Yeah.
to act now. And
Right.
so like I literally did the calculations. I'm like, how many seats are in a
Right.
how many seats are in a stadium? And so it was like, okay, and then like 13 times 13, all right, that's a million. Okay, boom. There's my thing, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you put 13 NFL stadiums together, that's a million seats. And
That's a
only six
lot.
of those are for black people, right?
Yeah. That's like a half
Um,
a person, like a stadium.
Correct. Correct. Right.
Yeah.
Now it's still not a lot compared to, I mean, I could have done something where it was like 6 people per 235,
Yeah. But no,
like
you got to
235 their
quantify it.
white counterparts, but you still need
Yeah.
to be able to see like the
Right.
massiveness of like, it's a million people and only six of them are black. Like that is
Right.
insane.
Absolutely. No, no, for sure.
um, yeah. And so that's what, that's how that quote came about.
Hmm.
Um, and then for the, black people being owned as property and, or being considered property, there was a law, and I stated this in the testimony. It was called the Meritorious Manumission Act, of Virginia, 1710. And it essentially stated that you could gain your freedom if you did three things. And Dr. Claude Anderson talks about this a lot, but I don't think anybody really focuses on the part where they like are talking about you being able to gain your freedom by giving something that the person that enslaved you could profit from, right? Because
Right.
it could be anything, but a lot of that time, a lot of those things ended up being inventions.
Yeah.
And so um, there was a time where if you were not the inventor, that you could not claim ownership, right? To
Hmm.
say like, oh, I invented this, because
Yeah.
you were not the person that actually did it. But then I want to say when Grant became president, was it Grant? It was early on,
Right.
that they changed the rules and said, okay, if you are a person that is enslaving someone and you can basically attest to the fact that you saw them create it and you own them, right? Then you can say that you invented it.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what they were doing.
Yeah, no, for sure, and that's generational wealth, right? Because I think that like if you
Yeah.
really think about like a lot of these systems, a lot of these systems are organized like around heavy and hard engineering, right? So all like I think like 12 main industries, and all of them are pretty much engineering. And if you think about it, like for example, if you can take patents right from people and then make money off of that, right, and then pass it down to your children and children's children, then that right there is generational wealth. So then, can you please also talk to me about what you're doing today with ESA, Equity Space Alliance, and how that kind of ties into generational wealth with commercialization, and how that kind of fuels your trajectory to where you're going and where you are now.
Yeah, absolutely. So now, so I still have the commercializer, but
Hmm.
like I said, I am a serial entrepreneur. So I
Right.
co-founded a creative agency as well, and now have
Hmm.
really pushed forward into the new space economy.
Right.
And ended up getting my master's from Thunderbird School of Global Management,
Hmm.
in space leadership, business, and policy, and then started the Equity Space Alliance, which is a global impact company, space company, essentially that focus on bridging the gap between resources and historically excluded communities so that they can be successful within the space economy, which is now
Right.
projected to be. It was 1.3 trillion, but like those numbers keep coming up. But
Yeah.
by 2030, so we'll
Right.
just stick with the old number because like that's still a lot of money.
It's a lot. Yeah.
That's
If it's
still a
if it's
lot
in
of
the
money.
teens,
Yeah,
just
like
say trillion
yeah,
dollar
like,
market. Yeah.
and it's still rising, right? It's still
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
up. But we're in a space right now where we are going to get left behind if we don't start to think about emerging industries, and space being one of those. So space is not it is not industry agnostic, or
Yeah.
yeah, it's not industry agnostic. And so you can have space in cybersecurity, you can have space in AI, you can have space in or AI in space, cybersecurity in space. You could have health in
Agriculture.
space. You can have
Yeah.
agriculture in space. You could have
Yeah.
engineering in space. You could have all of these different industries, tech in space, right? And so I have decided to take all of my skill sets and the things that I know with the creative industry, with people who are formerly incarcerated, so criminal justice reform, as well as commercialization, and kind of package those all in one where we can really help people in an
Hmm.
emerging industry, which is space,
No,
essentially.
no, absolutely.
And so as we start to think about the projections, right? It's $1.3 trillion by 2030. What does that mean for communities who have been historically excluded, particularly when the wealth of those communities is very low? So
Yeah.
for the Black community, the median wealth that is projected by 2053 is supposed to
Yep.
be zero.
Yep.
Zero. And then for Latinos, it's by 2073. And so if we're thinking about emerging industries and emerging economies, and we still have the same projection for those communities that have been economically distressed, there's a problem, right?
Hmm.
Because they should be able to be a part of these new emerging industries and then change that projection or that trajectory of wealth. And so that's what we're ultimately trying to do, is to say, hey, there are other opportunities that you can start to participate in if you get into them very early on,
Yeah.
and then position yourself so that you can maybe exit, right? So if we see, I think what people tend to not understand, specifically people within our communities, is that when you go out and raise funding, like this has just been like the standard, like
Yeah.
that's what everybody is doing. So like that's what I'm gonna do now, and not really understanding like when you raise funding, you have to have an exit so that you can actually get a return on investment to your investors, right?
Yep.
And so that means like you're either gonna IPO,
Go
right?
public. Yep.
Or you're going to get acquired, or you're going to merge or sell off a part of your assets or something like that. And typically what tends to happen is we don't sell them to people that look like us, right?
Hmm.
And so then our community gets very upset with us because they're like, oh, you
You a
you're a
sellout.
traitor. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
sellout, right?
Yeah.
Not realizing. So what I've been telling people is like, hey, build those companies at which you could sell, right? That
Hmm.
have tech in them, that like are doing all these, that are in these emerging industries. Sell it so that you can get liquid very fast. You can get the cash, and then invest that into back into your community, or create something where you know it's going to be a legacy
Yeah.
company that you're going to keep and then be able to pass down to generation after generation. Um, but those are really the only ways in which we are able to actually get the wealth that we need outside of real estate. But even with real estate, you have to take the money out. Like you got to liquidate.
Yeah.
Either you're going to sell it or you're going to pull the equity out.
Right.
But then you still have that debt. So like there's so many different things that we can think about. And so for us, it's more so like, hey, government contracting right now for emerging industries, specifically space, you get billions with a
Yeah.
B,
With the
right?
B. Yeah. Yeah.
With a B. And so
Right.
like Aisha Bowe, shout out to Aisha Bowe,
Hmm.
was a part of a team that won a $974 million contract.
Contract. Yep.
Now, the rules around government contracts or any type of like federal funding is that essentially you are required to subcontract at least 25%
Yeah.
of that
20. Yep.
to
To small
small
business.
businesses. But that
Right.
doesn't always mean minority owned. And
Hmm.
that doesn't always mean black and brown owned, which we've seen that a lot of like minorities means white women, right?
Yeah.
And so that's how they're able to check that box. And so we're still struggling at the end of the day.
Hmm.
And so how can we make it more equitable within that minority percentage, right? That we're
Yeah.
supposed to be seeing, or within the small business percentage, for us to be able to actually be successful in this space. And so those are some of the things that we're looking at doing, is like, how do we get more minority owned
Right.
businesses to actually own space companies or get them integrated into the space industry, into the space economy, so that they can offer their services and their products. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be tech based or tech enabled.
Hmm.
You could be utilizing some of the technology that has actually come from space. And so now you're space enabled, right?
Right.
It doesn't have to be space based, right? Either, because let's just say I want to use data that then is going to help me, you know, it's going to power a report that's going to be then given to somebody else that will then
Right.
be able to use that as insights into their space business. Now you're now you have space clients. Now you're in the space industry, or you do social media, or you do marketing and branding, and like, let's just say you do a campaign for a space company. Now you're in the space economy, right? And so those dollars that are in that economy are now starting to trickle into other industries, and so we just want our people to be a part of that.
No, and that's great. And then I have a couple more. I have about three more questions just to follow up, right? So the first one is you have the 8A certification, is what you're referring to for minority-owned businesses. Is that
No,
what you mean? No, okay, no. So
no.
yeah, can you
So
explain that? Yeah,
8A, so 8A is specifically for women-owned businesses, but it is another type of certification. So you can still be a woman-owned business, and be a woman-owned small business or woman-owned socially disadvantaged business. They have all these different things, but AA is a completely different certification
got it.
than that, and so you don't necessarily have to get your AA. I've been told, like, you should get your, because you only get it for a certain amount of years,
Got it.
right?
Okay.
But I can still be considered a woman-owned business, but not get AA certification. So there are certain pots of money that are set aside just for AA,
Mm-hmm. I
right?
see.
And
Got it.
so there's woman-owned, right? There's money that's set aside for woman-owned business, and then there's money that's set aside for AA businesses.
Got it.
And so we're not in the 8A yet. We're just women-owned, and small business owned, minority owned.
Got it. Okay. And then last question is, if you are a small business in Oakland or San Diego, I asked the same question to DJ, right? And you were looking to be a part of the space economy, how can you get started, right? So maybe you have one to two, employees and you have a product and you want to get interested and you want to commercialize your product into the space economy. How would you do that?
Well, first you need to just do research around, how your product would fare in a space
Hmm.
environment. So you really need to start thinking about, like, what what is a problem that, your product would be able to solve. So even if you don't have, let's just say, a tech-based, uh, a tech-based product, let's just say you're a beauty company, right?
Hmm.
Like, you have, I mean, that still can be considered tech in a
Tech
way, because
based.
it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
chemicals and, stuff like
Right.
that. So, but let's just say you have like a candle. You're a
Hmm.
candle company,
Right.
um, how does your candle work in space, right?
Right.
I was talking with, there was a company, one company I was talking about that did feminine healthcare. And so I was like, well, what does feminine healthcare look in space? Like, because I don't know. Like, will, as we start to have more women go to space and be in space for longer periods of time, like, there was like this whole thing about like a man going to say, like, oh, well, they didn't know how many sanitary napkins or tampons to put in a box for the woman. So they just said, oh, just throw 100 in there. She should be fine.
It's not how it works.
Or like they have to like be put on special like birth control or something so that they don't have menstrual cycles while they're in there. So like I like these are things that we're going to have to start thinking about as you start getting people who have been historically excluded from those
Hmm.
spaces, or for those spaces where they were not necessarily thought about, like intentionally thought about when they were actually creating it. Because our DNA, our structure, all of that is going to be different for different people. So Black people's DNA may not, act the same, or our the our hair, right? Even just thinking about that, like, how are Black
Yeah.
women going to be able to do their hair in space? And as you think about it now, most of the astronauts that we have seen who are Black had a really short haircut, right? They
True.
cut their
Yeah.
hair all off, so they didn't have to worry about it. But now you see like on YouTube, you can go and then like there's women who are doing their hair in space, but they don't have like our hair texture. So they're like
Got it.
taking the water and they're just putting the water
Nice.
in their
Yeah.
hair. And then they're like, okay, and then you just rub this through and then you use the dry shampoo. And it's just like,
Yeah.
that's not working for Black women. That's
Yeah.
not
Yeah. It's
working.
not working. No,
So
no, for
I don't
sure.
know what we're gonna do. Like,
Yeah.
what does the wash day look like
Right.
for Black women in space? And so there's just certain things that I think you need to start thinking about. But really, the first thing is like, how will my product fare in a space environment? So going back to the candle, right? You have the flame. You have is the smell gonna like having a flame in space? That I don't think that that's going to work, right? Because you have so much, and DJ and I have talked about this, like, because I was
Yeah.
even talking about cannabis in space. Like, well, what if we could get Snoop Dogg to go to
Right.
space and like he want to have, Snoop, he got to smoke everywhere
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
go. He's smoking
Everywhere he
space.
goes.
How do you smoke in space without
Right.
blowing
Right.
everybody up? Like, what does that? Because he's like, do you realize how much
Right.
oxygen is actually being produced? And I'm like, and so for me, then I start thinking about like, okay, he goes, well, I guess you could put him in a chamber that doesn't have, that much oxygen in it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
and then I think about, because I'm not the engineer, right? DJ's the engineer. I'm not the engineer. But then
Yeah.
I start thinking about like, well, DJ, well, if we put him in a chamber that doesn't have much oxygen, how are they going to be able to breathe? Right? And he goes, Janeya, we're not operating with 100% oxygen here on Earth. And I'm like, oh, so he's like, you just turn it down to a level where they can still breathe and that the flame can
Yeah.
come on, but it's not going to,
Blow up.
combust. And I'm
No, for
like,
sure.
oh, I didn't think
I
about that. So
see.
it's just like,
Yeah.
you have to really start thinking outside of the box, but you have to get with people who
Yeah.
actually understand what's
A lot of these
really
things.
happening and what's going on. And so that's kind of like where we come in, because we have the expertise, we have the skill sets, and we can have those conversations. But like, I don't know how to make candles,
Right.
right? I don't know how to, like, that's not my area of expertise, right? So we want to give you the spark, right, to then go down that rabbit hole to start to understand how can your product start to fare in the space environment, and then
Right.
come back to us with those questions. Like, how I was asking, well, if you did this, then like, wouldn't this be? And then we could, kind of
Have the
walk through that
conversation.
process with you,
Yeah.
right? And so, so that's one thing. And then really getting it tested in a microgravity environment. So we have partners that actually have that equipment that we're working through right now to make that accessible for our clients, so that they
Hmm.
can actually test their stuff in space, and then be able to kind of like move forward based off of that.
Great. Well, thank you for your time. I think our viewers would really, really enjoy this one. I mean, again, I really appreciate it. And that's it. So thank you guys for listening to the Space Time Podcast. We have Janeya Griffin, and we're about to log out. Peace.
Thank you.